I'm Al McFarlane. Welcome to The Conversation with Al McFarlane. I'm glad to be here and glad to have you along as well. Let me send a special shout out to the Sykes family. I just posted to the Sykes Family 1000 Facebook page, inviting all of my relatives by the name of Sykes to tune in and check us out here at the Healing Circle on The Conversation with Al McFarlane every Friday. And the idea is that there's 1,000 people in that Facebook group, and there are several more. Sykes, my family lineage is that my mom is a Sykes. The Sykes come out of Sunflower, Mississippi, and all across northern Mississippi, and even into the Carolinas, I believe. But my mother was a Sykes, and her dad, Alan Sykes Sr., and it seems like many more Sykes connected throughout northern Mississippi, throughout the Delta. And so, and the family is connected, and I want to bring that connection to what we're doing, this work here on The Conversation. So if you are a Sykes, if you got the Facebook, jump on Facebook or YouTube, especially go to YouTube, and let us know you're there. Let us know where you're joining from, and say hello. Let us shout you out. And I'm going to try to reach out to as many as I can in the Sykes family. We want you to help us grow this program. Our goal is to get 1,000 subscribers. And we're at 300 plus now. So I'm going to lean into the family and invite all of the family to help bring our numbers up. I'll do the same thing with the McFarlane family, which goes into the Caribbean and places abroad as well. So with that, let me welcome you again to The Conversation with Al McFarlane, to Friday's program, The Healing Circle, and welcome my dear friends. I call them colleagues, but I call them really teachers, educators, and I sit with them and before them as a student, as a learner, and as a journalist who appreciates their training, their gifts, their perspective, and their work as healers. I'm talking about Dr. B, Dr. Bravada Garrett-Akinsanya, and Dr. Oliver Williams, two legendary communicators, educators, healers in our community. Dr. B, first of all, let me pass the talking stick to you, and let's begin the program with the protocol that is so wonderful and so rich.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye, Al. As we do every week, we enter the circle. It's virtual, and although we're not in the same room, we see ourselves as being in a circle of our villagers in our village. So while we're in the circle, we believe in using circle because circle has no beginning or end. And throughout that circle, everyone has equal access to the center of the circle, which is the place of power. So we share power in the circle. We also share voice. And in that space, we use a talking stick virtually that is passed among us as we are in conversation. And one can ask for the stick if you have a burning question or comment. But the orderly nature of us as an African people is observed when we're in the circle. In addition to that, we sit in the circle as in honor of our elders. We give deference to our elders in the circle, and we honor our elders because they are closest to our ancestors. And we honor our ancestors because they're closest to our Creator. So as we sit in this healing, loving, safe space with one another, the sacred connection between all of us is valued, used, explored, and strengthened. So thank you for letting me explain the talking circle and the healing circle, and also the fact that as African people, we have this value called consubstantiation, where we're all connected to each other. We're connected to the earth and the sea and the sun and the trees. And this value has been shared by our Lakota brothers and sisters, the indigenous people on whose soil we live and breathe and love. So I will pass the talking stick right back to you. Bye-bye, Al.
Well, thank you, Dr. B. And I'm going to ask Dr. Oliver to jump in to open the conversation up. I've got several questions that we came up with that we want to cover over the course of this next, 50 minutes or so. But today, this Friday, I had my regular session with my therapist. Just in the spirit of disclosure, not only is Dr. B my friend and a customer for my company and a partner in this adventure, but I'm a patient of her company, and I see a therapist out of the Breakins organization every week, and today was my day. And as I looked at today's program, the question we're raising is how you do group therapy. Because right now, my experience in being using therapy has been one-on-one with my therapy, and I tell you, over the past couple of years, it makes a difference, keeps me kind of even, balanced, gives me the tools I need to navigate sometimes very, very difficult terrain, to navigate my own doubt, to navigate my own fears. And it also helps me keep in check my ability to escalate in my own mind out of the realm of what's practical and what's real. You need help. I need help anyway, put it that way. And so the therapy is important. That's the point I want to make. And I love saying that here, giving my personal testimony, because I'm hoping that other Black people in general and Black men in particular will decide that we can move past any notion of stigma and move towards recognizing that these gifts of healing and of support exist in our community, and we simply need to reach out and connect. And so, as my experience has been a one-on-one, the question today is about group. And I think about that and I said, how would I do? How would I feel? Would I feel comfortable enough to sit with other men or with men and women or with different configurations of people? What's that like? And so that's the question today. The first question is, how can mental health professionals, Dr. Williams, balance the need to create a safe space for healing in group therapy sessions, balance that with the need to challenge the harmful beliefs or behaviors that may be contributing to mental health issues in Black communities? That's a big question. Dr. Williams, good afternoon, dear brother. I'm passing the talking stick to you.
Thank you, Brother Al. I think that's a really good question, too. One of the things that I like about group is the fact that you find, identifying what the purpose of the group is really important, because it sets the tone for what's going to happen throughout the time that you're together. And when I got to Minnesota, the early years, there was something that happened in the community that I got invited. So Resma was connected with Mahmoud and a few other people that were in the Twin Cities. And so on Saturday mornings, we would get together and have a group of brothers, and started out with maybe about 15, and then it grew until it was probably about 120 brothers on a Saturday morning in the basement of a church. That was a group.
Mm-hmm.
And we started having conversations about different things, and it shifted, and there are reasons why I think it sort of disbanded, but identifying what the purpose of the group was something that was real important. The conversations that we had was the reason why the group grew, and so I think connected us all together, because we were there having conversations that were very, very important. And one of the things that I thought was interesting too, the style that we use was sort of similar to what Native Americans do. Is that somebody will get up and start talking, and they'll keep talking till they're finished. But the themes that we were talking about were themes that we could all relate to. And so as we were dealing with things, we weren't dealing with it in isolation. And that's one of the things that I think is real important about groups, is that when you identify what the purpose is and you get people to start coming into the group, they have a connection to that issue that's being discussed, or they should. And that when you hear something that you can be an active participant, or you can be a passive participant, but you get something from what other people are saying because it relates to what your experience is. And that, I love groups. I've done groups for families. I've done groups, certainly in batterers intervention groups. That's a group setting typically. And then for recovery groups for sexual assault and for domestic violence, I've done those groups, and I've done groups with adolescents, delinquency groups, and and I've done substance abuse groups. So each one identifying what the purpose is, and then as people have conversations about issues and challenges and struggles that they're going through, it's all important, and people get something out of it. Now, I have a colleague. I don't know that we had Dominique Walltower on it. For some reason, I think we did, but if we haven't, we should. And one of the things that he talks about is the fact that if you're going to do group work, you should also have a connection where somebody can connect with a person individually. And because some people may not feel as comfortable with issues associated with privacy. And if there's something that they want to discuss and explore, it gives them it gives them an opportunity to be able to discuss it with an individual therapist associated with something. But I love it, and I do. And what's also interesting, even though it's something directed for the clients, and the person as a group therapist, I think, really guides the process. But there can also be something not only for the clients that are there, but also for the facilitator. There's truth that you're trying to explore, and there are ways that you're trying to have conversations that have significance to all the members in the group, and trying to find ways to include them in it is something that's real important. And hearing everybody's voice is real important, and giving different dimensions to it. So as I mentioned to you, Brother Al, I'm going to be going to 2 different states to talk about fatherhood and domestic violence. And among the things that's going to be interesting in that is we're talking about the intersections in terms of dealing with those issues. But I've seen some very powerful things occur, in the course of things, as you've had the conversations about the issues. I've seen things where people didn't think that the issue was relevant, and then you start having conversations about it. Then people became enthused about being a part of the conversation and seeing their role in it, then making efforts to start to change. And I think that it can be very, very powerful when people find their place in the conversation. I won't do it now, but I'm going to pass the talking stick. But I have some examples that I want to share with you about it. And it was very powerful in seeing people move towards seeing the relevance of the issue. So with that, I'm going to pass the talking stick back to you, Brother Al.
Well, I'll pass it to Dr. B because I want to get back to you and those examples as well. So,
okay,
Dr. B, I'm passing the talking stick to you.
Okay, and I receive it. Thank you so much. I'm excited to talk about group therapy because, in fact, I think it is one of the vehicles that can heal a family, that can heal a community. One of the things about group therapy is that it depends on what kind of group you're having. So some groups are called open groups. And in open groups, anybody can come anytime. They come in and out of the group. AA is an example of an open group. Most of the time, you're in a community. If you don't live there, you can find a meeting that you can go to and get support. But then there have other kinds of groups called closed groups. And when closed groups are established, they have a certain number of people. They may have a certain criteria for you to be in that group. And once you get into a closed group, you vote on whether you want to expand your group. There's a ritual for coming into the group and a ritual for coming out. So for Black folks, one of the reasons groups is so healthy for us is because in all of the suffering that we've experienced, in our philosophy about life, it's always communal. I am because we are. I found as a clinician that being trained by white folks, we would have kids, we walk them up to McDonald's to get a treat if they did a good job that week at school. And I found that when you go to McDonald's, you get the kid a burger, or mostly they like chicken nuggets. You take them there, you're going to sit outside with them to eat, and they'll sit their burger down. Or they may take a bite or two off their burger or their nuggets. And you're wondering, do you like them? Yeah, but I'm saving some for my mom. I'm saving some for my brother. And this was a phenomena that was happening until we hit on the fact that when I go see a family, I'm not going to take a drumstick to the mother and let everybody else be hungry. I better come up there with a bucket of chicken wings or something else. So when you join community and when you have community, you think about how our values and our survival has been achieved. And it's always been group oriented. So actually, that's our natural proclivity. The problem with groups is that we don't want folks to know our business. So as group leaders, you have to create a reputation for being safe. And you have to screen people in and out of groups. Because some people, their issues are too big for a group. And they'll come into the group and everybody be in there and they'll be the only ones talking. And other people have aching, burning questions and things they need to share. And if you don't do that with the group you have, you're going to have problems. So when people come to groups, I see it as exceptionally strong because it's not just one person telling you that this is good or bad or work for me. You've got a village helping you to choose and letting you many times see the various outcomes of various choices you make. For example, when Dr. Oliver talks about working with battered partners, intimate partner violence, and they're in a group, somebody would talk about leaving and what happened. Somebody would talk about not leaving and what happened. Somebody would talk about if their children were abused versus when their children were not. And they get this whole microcosm of experiences and outcomes that no one therapist can help them come to. It's just very, very powerful. And so I really believe in groups. And as we talk more, I'm going to explain why we're going to be doing a group for people who have long COVID so that they can come forward and talk about the pain and the existing phenomena that they're experiencing. And with that, I'll give you the talking stick, Brother Al.
Well, thank you, Dr. B. I'm going to pass it right over back to Dr. Williams. The examples you were going to share. This is an exciting topic, so thanks to both of you. I think it's timely, it's critical, and just to hear you all, make this accessible to us ordinary people, I think it's critical and important. So thank you, Dr. Williams. Here's the talking stick.
Thank you, Brother Al. Well, one of the things that I think can be very important, particularly when you do a group with Black men, is talking about the things that unite us. You can also have conversations about the things that divide us, but having conversations about the things that unite us is important. So, oftentimes when we deal with microaggressions that happen in life, we deal with it individually. And when you deal with it within a group and you have conversations about it, not only do you hear people hear it and then validate it, They can also talk to you about the ways that they've managed to handle it. And that's something that's real important. And hearing people give voice to those things certainly validates the other members that are in the group, but also providing different ways to be able to address the issue is important too. So let me give you an example of something that I was moved by with regard to the impact of addressing issue of fatherhood and domestic violence. So, Dominique has some really good examples about why he thinks it's important and topics that you should bring up. But years ago in Ramsey County, there's a guy named Jody Anderson who was a probation officer, and he would bring guys together. And these are all guys who have completed the group. So they had been there for, maybe 52 weeks. And they completed. But some of them were still, struggling a little bit. And so what he did was he had them attend one final presentation. And it happened for like 4 hours, which is unusual because usually it's like an hour and a half, 2 hours, per group. But he had, people there for 4 hours, and he had different people doing presentations. So there was one guy that they had on video, and it was a man that had been through a group, and he had talked about his use of violence, and talked about, and it happened years ago. And so he had talked about what he had done in the relationship and his struggles and how he got there, and then he left, and then he was almost pushing police to, arrest him and put him into the group. So, but he talked about knocking his wife's teeth out, and then talking about being resistant. But then for whatever reason, he took responsibility for it after coming to the group a couple times. And then he said that his daughter, who was, a child at the time, witnessed the things that he had done. So he talked about the fact that he had gotten it. He and his wife were in the process of getting a divorce, but he made a change, and he wasn't. And women should not hear about men who change and be engaged in reconnecting with them. I think sometimes the best thing that can happen for a man that's been abused is for his partner to leave and for him to learn through that pain. But that's a side comment. What happened in this situation is that they managed to get back together, and he started to live a life without violence. And his videotape was over. So they had a young woman who was a battered women's advocate come up and do a presentation. And so she said that she talked about her history of having the domestic violence in her life, and the fact that she was exposed to it, and it was horrible to see what her mother went through. And then she talked about her life, because as she got older, she got into domestic violence relationships. And she talked about the fact that she had been in 2 different relationships where 2 different partners shot at her. She talked about being strangled to unconsciousness. She talked about the fact that she felt like she wanted to commit suicide. But she said that she got to a place where she could understand when a situation was going to occur and recognize that it wasn't her issue. It was the person that was doing the abuse. It was their responsibility. And she said, "Oh, by the way, the person that you saw in the videotape was my father."
Wow.
So you saw guys looking at their watches to see what time this thing was going to be over. When she made that comment, you saw guys raising their hand, trying to figure out what could they do to prevent their child going through that. The thing that was moving to me was how they were moved by it. And what seemed to engage them was the fact that they could not deny what they had done. And they heard something from a guy who had changed his life. And their child still went through that. And they wanted to figure out a way to prevent that from happening to their child. So you saw a lot of people who were maybe 2 people, 3 people seemed to be real engaged, to the point where everybody in the group was raising their hand. And there had to be about 300 men that were there. And so, and then as we've had conversations about this and then talk about it, one of the things that I've seen over the many years that I've done this work is see people try to undo some of the things that they've been responsible for. One of the first guys years and years ago, there was a man that was really responsible for the violence that was going on in his home. He would talk about the fact that he was upset with his children and his wife because they left cigarette butts, around the house, but he was the only one in the house that was smoking, and so he was upset that they hadn't emptied it. So as we brought up that issue, and other men were able to confront him about his behavior, not taking ownership. But at any rate, his wife was about to divorce him. He had threatened her family, and she was leaving him, and she was getting engaged to someone else. He ended up looking at himself and started taking responsibility and changing. Then as he started to change, he started looking at not only his daughter, but also his son, and taking responsibility for it. Anyway, a year went by, and she didn't get married to that other guy. She got reconnected with him. And as a consequence, he started to be an advocate around the issue of domestic violence. As a matter of fact, I had him co-facilitating some groups with me after waiting about a year or so. But been about 2 years. And so, and I always interviewed the woman and interviewed the kids to try to figure out, how truthful is, and never depended on his comments by himself. And so one of the things that occurred was he was a great advocate and co-facilitator, because game can always confront game when there are other men that are in the group and they need to be confronted. He was able to do it, but they were able to make a connection with him because they realized that he had gone through it as well.
Right.
That was something that I thought was real important, but he was able to talk about what issues he needed to be confronted about, which was a model for the other men that were in the group. And when I think about Dominique has got 2 groups, one for the city of San Diego and one for the county of San Diego. And he works for the military and does groups in the military. And one of the things that he had talked about as he had been doing his work was that he ended up talking about his children. And he said that when he had been an actively violent person, his children would not go to him and talk to him about things. They said that what they needed to do, because they didn't feel safe, they'd always go to the mother, but they'd never talk to him. He talked about needing to develop a safe space. And he said that he asked his so he and his wife got divorced, but they became better co-parents. And they said they made efforts to try to reconcile, but then they thought that it was healthier for them not to be in a relationship. But they asked their children, and this is the thing I thought was so brilliant about what he did. He asked his children for a Yelp review.
Mm.
And so I said, a Yelp review? So he said, yeah. I said, so what's a Yelp review? He said, for them to be honest with me and the mother and to talk about how they did as parents. And he said that he has three boys, and they're now 30, 28, and 22. And he said they told him that they sucked as parents. But they had the boys had to feel as though they could feel safe in talking to them. And that he had to create a different environment, differently than his wife. Because they felt safe, and the safe place was their grandma's house, not his mother. But his wife's mother was a safe place for him to be able to go for safety when they felt uncomfortable and threatened. But what he had to do was he had to take responsibility for things. Yeah. And I thought that what he discussed was important. So coming up with things like that and confrontations and strategies about how to approach it is something that you can get within a group.
That's right.
Where people share their wisdoms about what it is that they do, but also finding ways to be able to validate it and to recover and to take accountability for themselves.
Yeah.
Which is what, what I noticed with the people I'm talking about. One of the things that they did is they took responsibility for what they did, and then demonstrated it. And other men do that with one another as well. Yeah. And so that's the power of a group, I think.
Let me have the stick. I'm excited. So you just hit on some very important pieces of group work. One of the most important things in group is to be able to develop a sense of cohesion and trust.
Right.
And one vehicle we use when people come, of course, is we have a contract. You sign a contract about that I won't be telling people's business outside the group. And in the group, you even decide as a group how you're going to acknowledge each other in public. Whether you want to say, oh, I'm in a battered men's group with him, or I'm okay, or we go to church, whatever you're going to say, or I know him from community. So you come up with a language that tells people in the group, when we're out of here, we have expectations. And in here, we have expectations. And in that contract that they sign, they often sign, what would happen if I breach, if I break confidentiality? And a lot of the groups that I run, people have a vote whether they want you in or out, whether they want to forgive you or not. So there are often consequences. But one of the biggest parts that you hit on in the group is the power of the reflection of yourself in the mirror of others. Some of the most powerful things I've ever seen have come out of group members being honest. And some of the most dysfunctional acknowledgments I've seen have happened in a group. For example, I was doing a women's group, a young women's group, and people were talking about their relationships with their fathers. And as they went around the group saying, oh, my dad and I, we do this, or my dad's never been around, or whatever. And they went on, and the group was mixed. And it was at one of the colleges I used to work with. It was mixed in terms of their social economic status. There were girls who grew up in very poor homes who were in college on scholarships or financial aid. And there were girls who had brand new cars. Their parents were what we call filthy rich. They never had to ask for anything. And one of the comparisons I remember was a girl saying that her father was absent most of her life. She was like 19 or 20. He was not around most of her life. He didn't stay married with her mom. He didn't check on them. He wasn't there when big things happened. And she said this, of course, tearfully. And as the talking stick went around the room, slowly people were saying the good things with their dad, the bad things. One of the young women in the group just started to tear up. And then soon as I could look over, I mean, she was like in deep, deep, deep pain, just really crying hard. And we stopped for a moment with the stick. And the whole group and we looked at her. And one girl had said that her dad used to hug her when he was so proud of her, or he would tell her how proud he was of her. And this young woman came from this very rich family. She said, my dad never hugged me in my life. My dad has never told me that he cares about me. He was home, but he wasn't. He was on business almost all of my life. He was never there for the big things. You say your dad wasn't there for the big things. Mine wasn't there either. And it showed me and all of us that whether you have money or not, being present in your children's life is the biggest gift you give them. So even if you're broke, you can go to the park with your child walking, throwing sticks in the water so you can make the biggest whirlpool. And they will remember that. If you're broke, you can go to the dollar store and get a card for your child. Even though the mom and you don't get along, you send your daughter a card. She'll keep that card until you give her another one. She would keep it. I've seen women come to therapy individually, holding a card, maybe the 1 or 2 cards they ever got from their father. I got this one when I was 12. He gave me this one when I graduated from high school. No cards in between, but I know he knew I was alive. And I resent the fact that I didn't get all of those things from him. And I've had to have men in therapy saying, brother, trust me, sending a card, no matter how crazy mama drama, daddy baby drama you got, sending her a card says that you see her. I know this. And so group therapy is a place where the therapist can sit back and actually the group can do the work. I'm just saying, you let reality run through that space. Your job is to keep it going, is to create that space for healing to come about. But there is this African proverb that says, an axe, right? An axe does, a tree remembers what an axe forgets. We forget the harm, but people who are harmed, they remember. And when you're in that group process, those memories come forward. And sometimes the way you were harmed was the way somebody else harmed somebody else. So that reflective practice of having someone in there like you telling the other side of your story or telling your same story. So that's why I want to have more and more groups. We've had Black women's group, Black men's group, teenage groups, little children group. I mean, it's amazing what happens when we work together. So with that, I just wanted to jump back, Brother Oliver Williams, if you want to stick back, I'll hand it to you. Or Brother Al, if you want to stick, I'll say my piece.
Let me take it and I'll hand it back to Dr. Williams. So this was a great conversation. So you talked about different groups, and I wanted to ask either of you, what are some of the difficult groups? Do you already know? I mean, I'm thinking I could be wrong, but how do we use groups to reach subgroups, use group therapy to reach subgroups in our community? For example, the LGBTQ plus individuals or people with the so-called mobility or disability issues. Are there systems, are there practices, are there groups right now that you are aware of that have been effective in addressing the particular interests and needs? And then for me, the question is, how do we keep a conversation going between, the whole family or a multi-generational or multi-configured group of people that includes elders, young people, women, men, boys, girls, and people that have LGBTQ plus configurations. Does that happen already? Can it happen? Should it
Yeah,
happen? Dr. Oliver, I'm
yeah,
asking you.
I think it does happen, Al, and I think that we could probably find ways to promote it differently and better. But identifying the purpose of the group
That's right.
is the one thing that you need to do, because that's the reason why everybody. So there are things called formal groups and informal groups, and so when you have formal groups are things that you construct. And so if you have like a batterers group or a substance abuse group or a teen group or an LGBT group, those are going to be groups that you form. But then there's something informal and natural groups like family, right? And or friendship groups. And you can get people to come together around those issues, but identify what it is that you need to talk about. So like if you deal with LGBTQ groups, identify what the purpose is of the group and getting people together to have conversations about it. You get different similar conversations, but also people who are dealing with different challenges. Now I have friends that are from the LGBTQ community, and one of my friends, we were friends since we were 19. And she was straight when we were in undergraduate school. But when she graduated and then she sort of lived in the world for a while, she decided to, that she was gay. And when I saw her in a same-sex relationship, I haven't seen her more happy. But the interesting thing was, she couldn't have those conversations within her family, and clearly not with her father. She could with her siblings. Now, but getting people together, having those conversations, you'll see people who manage to negotiate those things with the support of their family, of their biological family. But then you'll hear people have conversations about how they couldn't have that conversation within that family and what they needed to do to accommodate that. So as people are dealing with the challenges associated with that, that's something that's important. And also people who, I have a friend who is a professor at Bethel, and he psychologist, wonderful guy. But one of the things that he focuses on is trying to confront the issue of conversion therapy. And when you're trying to get people who are from the GLBTQ community and get them to not be who they are, and he's not for that, and he wants to confront that, and then having the conversation, finding supports around that is something that's real important to be able to do. Or from the trans community, people who are dealing with that, and so I have people that I've worked with who are from the trans community, but I also have other friends that are trans. And a friend that's out in San Diego who's a psychologist who does work with that, and it's an interesting thing. So I see that there's a comment that wants me to explain what conversion therapy is. Conversion therapy is not something that I have a lot of faith in at all. But what the issue is the fact that some churches and some places will try to get people to go into conversion therapy in order for them to deny the fact that they're gay, lesbian, transgender, and bisexual.
Yeah,
And,
can I jump in on that a little bit too?
go
Because
ahead, please.
Yeah, one of the things about conversion therapy is, in fact, our Minnesota legislature had to pass a law that they can't use that treatment for children or adolescents, because it is detrimental. It is actually when you hear people say pray the gay away, that's what they're describing is conversion therapy. They believe that you can put that sin away, that God didn't make you that way, that you're choosing to be that way. And it uses a whole lot of very aversive techniques to shame and break down people, so that they're so broken that they will say, okay, I'm straight, but really feeling inside that they're not. And it's one of the areas, like Dr. Oliver Williams was saying a moment ago, is one of the areas where we really have to make sure we're clear of what is this group for. So when people bring people together who are LGBTQ, and they may be questioning whether they're gay or lesbian or bisexual, they may be gender fluid in terms of how they feel their identity fits. And all of these things can be a space of shame if we don't handle it appropriately and understand that difference doesn't mean deviance.
Right.
You know, that's the core part of looking at conversion therapy. And that's the core part of having institutions like churches and businesses saying that, you know, it's against the Lord's will and all of that. Most of it, the bumping up against with GLBT, and I hope we talk about just the GLBTQ communities. I hope we have a discussion about that and being Black. Because one of the things I always wanted to write an article about is, can you be Black and gay and Christian? Can you do that? Can those three things coexist in a human being? And in our culture, many people who are gay, they feel more gay than Black, because they look at us as Black folks, shaming them, saying, you know you wrong. And they cleave to white communities where being gay is okay. So that they lose a lot of the support that they should and could get from people who actually understand that dynamic within the context of being Black. So I wanted to make sure I jumped in with that part about the conversion therapy, because that's one of my pet peeves, is to have clinicians ignore gender or sexuality. And I don't think we have a right to ignore it. That's just like somebody saying, I don't see you as Black.
Right.
So that's what I want.
Or I'm colorblind.
Yeah.
Exactly. So the thing that I think about it as well, is that James Baldwin was gay.
Yes, he was.
And to me, I think that I'm for people being able to identify both, because I think I've been at places. We did something in the city of Detroit at a faith university, and we were talking about what the community was dealing with. And so as it happened, the moderator was friends with a number of ministers that were in the crowd and invited them up to have a conversation. So there was a pastor that was railing on about the problem within our community is the fact that we have these GLBTQ people in the community, and that damages things. So, and I had to confront them and say, look, there are brothers, there are sisters, there are mothers, there are fathers, there are uncles, there are cousins, and we shouldn't be so quick to try to demonize people rather than to embrace them. And the other thing is the fact that, having grown up in the church, I knew that there were people who were, that were identifiable within the church.
Sure.
Who were from the GLBT community, or from at least the GLB community.
Mm-hmm.
And back then, and we used to do these groups collecting data and doing studies where we would have people from different affinity groups, including the GLBTQ affinity groups. They have conversations how the Black community was affected. So there's something that is important for us to, and I think white people are as bad about it in terms of dealing with accepting diversity within the community as Black people have been.
Yeah.
And so, so I think it's important to be able to talk about both sets of things. But I do think that there is an issue of identity that some people feel more permission wherever that sliding scale is. We just have to make sure that we keep the doors open to be able to talk about it. And Bravada, one of the things that I wanted to talk about too is when you're talking about open and closed groups. One of the things, when I think about open groups, it is a thing where people can rotate in or come in at any point in time. But one of the things that I think about learning from an open-ended group was when you've had members of the group who've been there for a long time, and then you have new members come in, and when you start to talk about the rules of the group, you have the older members recite to the newer members what the rules and the protocol of the group is.
That's right.
You can tell the learning that takes place when you hear them start to recite it.
That's right.
And some, even though I think I like closed-ended groups, what I like about open-ended groups is the fact that you can see the learning that takes place, and you get a chance to go over themes.
That's right.
With folks, and so closed-ended groups, I like it because you have a cohort that goes through from the beginning
to the end.
To the end, and so they get the same learning. But with open-ended groups, you have people who are there for various periods of time, and both things can be good. You just have to be thoughtful about, what happens with them.
And let me just ask this: in our clinic at the African American Child Wellness Institute, we do work with early childhood all the way up to geriatric, and I have a kind of a rule. And that is, if we get 6 or more people who tend to have the same problems or issues, that opens the door for us to have a group. Because I like to have a group that has maybe 6 to 8 to 10, especially the intimate groups where people can stick with each other for months and years to come. And when that happens, you can see that they use their knowledge and they use each other as resources. And the larger groups, though, that come in and out, I think that those can be more long-standing, and I've seen those benefit, especially when there's groups like Black men's groups or Black women's groups that we're teaching certain things. We call that psychoeducation groups, where we're teaching topics each week, and we're asking people to how that applies to them and helps them to heal, helps their children to heal. So there are various types of them, and I can tell anybody in the audience, if they see a group of people who want to do stuff, let us know. Like right now, I've got a mother who said she wants to have a Black male adolescent group that is for support and mentoring. So we may have a group where we have older men and younger youth together in a group. So that's what we're working on now, the mentoring and modeling support group for Black youth and men.
Interestingly enough, there's a group that I have a couple of friends that started, and it's called Circulo. And Circulo, it's a Latino group. And because Sonia's Puerto Rican and Sam's, and I'm African American, and we have a child that's bicultural, even though he's Afro-Latino. I was engaged with my friends, or Fernando Medeiros, but it was actually Ricardo Carrillo and Jerry Teo invited me to come to their group, and they had people Latinos from across the United States. And they've been to Minnesota before too to do some things. So they had this one group that was outside of probably about 45 minutes from San Jose, and it was a former military base. and they'd have people that came from different cities across the United States, and so and they had something called the altar, and you bring different elements associated with your family and all. And they had old men, they had young men, they had people that were college educated, but they had people that were from the streets and in gangs, and people who had transformed their lives in different areas. And so there were also people that ended up looking at not only their Latino heritage, but also their Native American heritage. And so when we got there, every day was an opportunity to be able to have conversations about things and to be able to learn from what happened and what people that dealt with challenges in their life, what they were able to do to be able to transform. We did smudgings. We did basically every day was like a day of prayer. And then at the end of it, what we did was we literally went to church on the last day, but every day was like a day of prayer where people were able to share and to talk about things, but then to talk about their culture too.
I love that.
And
this is so rich. We're almost out of time, minutes left to finish the program, but this is so rich and so wonderful. All I'm doing is processing questions, but I also don't want to interrupt you because you all are revealing and teaching and saying so much just in this conversation. Let me leave just with a couple of ideas that we can come back to this. I think the idea of valuing, elevating the notion of group therapy is a good one. And so a question I'll leave with is, what can we do? This is not for an answer now, but for us to think about in the future to involve, engage, enable community groups, community assets, institutions like schools or like athletic clubs or like youth centers. How can we encourage them to identify and support and promote the idea of group therapy from the families that they are connecting with? That's number one. But then I was also thinking, Dr. B and Dr. Williams, about the kinds of conversations we have with the different arrangements or configurations of the different ways to assemble what it means to be a human being. And one of the missions, as I'm hearing you, of therapy is to enable and support individuals in the capability of making sense in the world. And person A's strategy for making sense may be different from person B. But we all, however, in this country, in the society, are living within what's generally broadly referred to as a patriarchal society. But that in and of itself is something that we take for granted and rarely examine. And showing up different, that some have called showing up defective or deficient, but you, Dr. B, said, no, this is just showing up different. And different is okay. Challenges that the immutability of the patriarchal order. And so the question is, at what point in time and how do we bring other ways to assemble the world so that we recognize that may have had value and it's one way, but it's only one way. And there have to be other ways of collecting reality, collecting the world that really respect and free every human being to be the best human being that she or he or they can be. Well, I think we're at the end of the program. I'm going to drop the mic right there and drop it for all of us and say thank you all for being here. I'm Al McFarlane. Thank you, Dr. Oliver Williams. Thank you, Dr. Bravada Garrett-Akinsanya.